All right, well, we're just at about 5:04, so I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Again, I want to thank all of you that are joining us tonight for our third public meeting related to this project, the Loma Alta Slough Wetlands Enhancement Project. My name is Justin Gamble. I'm with the City of Oceanside's Water Utilities Department in the Watershed Protection Program. And our presentation is going to now begin. And hopefully we have all of our attendees that have intended to join in, and here we go. Let's go for our first slide, please. I want to thank you all for attending tonight, and we appreciate your interest in this project. Again, my name is Justin Gamble with the City of Oceanside, and I'm the project manager for this much exciting project that we've been planning for about the last year or so. I do want to note this planning project is entirely funded through the State Coastal Conservancy Prop 1 grant program. So we're very thankful to our partnering state agency as we continue moving forward with the engineering and design phase of the project. I'd also like to take a few minutes to introduce the project team and also other city staff that are on the line tonight to assist with your potential questions after the presentation. So we have Carrie Dale, the Director of the Water Utilities Department, in attendance. And we also have Richard Greenbauer with the city's planning division. And we also have our consultant team, Environmental Science Associates, including Lindsay Sheehan, our principal engineer, as well as Rima Chakra, our senior planner. And additionally, we have John Clemuniz with Dock and Engineering to answer any potential questions associated with the Coastal Rail Trail project. And we're very lucky to have all of you beautiful people here with us tonight to learn more about what we've been up to in the last few months since our last public workshop in January. Obviously, things look a little bit different this time around, but nevertheless, we're still excited to share our progress. So before we get into our agenda today, I want to make a reminder to attendees that since this is a public meeting, we do expect a certain level of decorum during our Q&A session, and that any unacceptable language or disruptive behavior will be grounds for dismissal from the meeting. Next slide, please. So here's our agenda for tonight's meeting. We're excited to provide you all with a brief background and the planning work that we've completed since the second public workshop in January, including the key findings of our technical studies that are informing the Loma Alta Wetland Enhancement design. We'll present the preferred restoration alternative that was born out of our previous community input and informed by our panel of experts, including wetland scientists, hydrologists, and biologists. Following that discussion, we'll provide information on the upcoming opportunity to provide a written public comment on our forthcoming environmental documentation, and then we'll move into our question and answer session. We expect roughly 30 minutes from our presentation, and that will cover the project background, the community input we've previously received, the restoration design, and our next steps. We plan on approximately 30 minutes or so for a Q&A, and I would like to note that if we don't get to your question this evening, please don't worry, we will provide information on how to follow up with the project team after the meeting. And now I'm going to turn it over to Rima with ESA to discuss the logistics for tonight's meeting.
Thanks, Justin. Good evening. I'm with ESA, the consultant team that's helping Justin with the restoration design. So as you've probably noted, when you joined the Zoom meeting, we had all attendees with their video and audio off. We are looking to devote half the webinar to your questions. So there is a Q&A icon along the bottom, and you guys some of you have been using it just to let us know who's in attendance. But we really encourage you to ask your questions as we work through the presentation. And then once we get to the question and answer, we'll work through those questions in the order that they've been received. We are a pretty sizable group, so we'll try our best to go through the questions. I might try to group some questions or themes across the questions so we can get to as many of them as possible. If we don't get to all of them, we are recording the questions, and we'll provide responses and post that to the project webpage, which we'll share with you later on. Next slide, please. I don't know that anyone's actually joined in just by phone, but there is a way for folks that have called in to allow us to unmute you and ask your question. So I'll do that first, and it's simply a matter of pressing #9 to allow you to ask your question. Next slide. So we'll also provide the opportunity for you to be unmuted and ask your question if there's time. And you simply need to click that raise the hand icon along the bottom of your screen. Next slide. So we'll be recording this presentation portion of the webinar so that we can post it to the project webpage. for folks that weren't able to attend, or for some of you that want to watch it again. That'll be made available. Next slide. So I just want to make sure everything's working really well. If everyone could practice and hit raise your hand, just to make sure it's all working. All right, I see lots of raised hands. Great, thank you. And I don't think anyone's joined by phone, so we're all nicely connected via internet, so that's great. Thank you. And for those of you that haven't done so already, please type in your name and affiliation if applicable, just so we can all see who's joined us today. That's it. I think back to you, Justin.
Great. Thanks very much, Rima. So now I'm going to provide a brief background on the project. Some of these slides may look familiar to some of you who attended the previous workshops, and I thank you for your patience as we bring everyone else up to speed. So here's the approximate location of Loma Alta Slough. It's located in Southwest Oceanside at the end of Loma Alta Creek, near Buccaneer Beach Park, which is very popular with both residents and visitors. The slough is a small estuary that receives water flows from both the Loma Alta Creek watershed that runs about 6 miles to the northeast, as well as tidal flows intermittently from the ocean at Buccaneer Beach. The majority of the watershed is urbanized, and the slough itself is much smaller today than its historical condition due to urban development and infill. Next slide, please. So this is our project study area. It's a more detailed view of the previous slide, and it's what's defined as our project study area in our feasibility study, as well as how it was defined in our Coastal Conservancy grant. So the project is roughly divided between a western area and an eastern area within the slough, as it's bisected north-south by the NCTD Railroad. So Buccaneer Beach Park and the beach itself are located to the south and west of the site, respectively. And the eastern project area includes vacant city-owned land, as well as 2 private parcels that were included in the planning effort solely with the hopes that ultimately in the future restoration can be completed there in a later phase of the project. Next slide, please. So why do this project? Why are we pursuing this? Well, over years of urbanization and past land use practices, Southern California in general has seen drastic losses of coastal wetland habitat, and also the value benefits that they provide to wildlife and people. Restoration is anticipated to bring back the ecosystem services of coastal wetlands and to improve the biology, the hydrology, and the community value of the system. The project will expand and improve the existing wetlands at the slough, while also increasing the opportunity for passive recreation through things like trails and educational signage that are included in the final site design. We expect this to be a multi-benefit project. So not only are we examining how we can improve the ecosystem and its biological value for sensitive species, but also how a comprehensive restoration can both improve water quality in the slough, create new recreational opportunities for our residents and our visitors, all while designing a project that is resilient to expected climate change impacts, including sea level rise and altered storm intensity. Next slide, please. Here's an overview of our process since the project was initiated in 2019. 2 previous public workshops were conducted to help the project team identify what the goals and the objectives of the Wetlands Enhancement were. And with your help, the community, we developed 3 conceptual design alternatives, and we brought those back for your consideration at the 2nd public workshop in January. So working in groups, community members helped the project team identify the general elements of the preferred design. And we finished up with a feasibility study this past spring, which we will be providing you with all for more information on how to access that as we are now moving into the design and permitting process. So throughout the summer, preliminary design and engineering work has progressed simultaneously with drafting of our CEQA documents, which is the state's Environmental Quality Act, and as well as the necessary agency permit applications. So following this meeting and finalizing the CEQA document, in early 2021, we hope to bring this project to the city's Planning Commission and the City Council to obtain the necessary approvals to certify the project while we pursue additional grant funding for construction of phase 1. And now I'm going to hand it over to Rima to discuss the feedback that we've previously received on the first 2 workshops.
Thanks, Justin. So the first workshop happened last summer, and that was at the very beginning of the project. And the purpose of this workshop was to hear from you on the aspects of Loma Alta Slough that you enjoyed and the aspects that you'd like to see changed. So on the next slide, we show the input that we received. And overall, everyone was in support of restoration for Loma Alta Slough. There was an interest in promoting public arts, in increasing the trail access, in increasing connections to existing and planned bike and transit and pedestrian facilities that are in the area, to make sure that there are no homeless encampments, to reduce stagnant water, and to make sure that the design is integrated and complementary of the projects that are adjacent and near the Loma Alta Slough area, and to consider impacts of sea level rise. On the next slide, we had our workshop was convened earlier this year. And at this workshop, we provided attendees the chance to sort of wear and their engineering hat, be an engineer for the day, and mix and match different designs to create a preferred design alternative in small groups. And as part of this exercise, on the next slide, we learned what the priorities are of the folks that were able to attend. We heard that there was interest in not making any restoration activities to Buccaneer Beach Park, a strong emphasis on creating a full loop trail around the Loma Alta Slough, a preference to bring in private property, the parent family trust property, if at all feasible, to become part of the restoration. There was the preference for the design with the meandering creek plus the perpendicular channels. There were some suggestions to bring in the observation platform closer into the wetlands, to create a crosswalk across Coast Highway to increase access to the trail, and to look at bringing in more property from the La Salina wastewater treatment plants for restoration. And on the next slide, you'll see the preferred design that the workshop attendees came together and put forth. And Lindsay will talk about how we took the input that we received during this workshop and informed that in our design. Some of the input we received will be aspects of the design that we'll deal with later on in the restoration phase, but Lindsay will touch on that.
Thanks, Rima. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the feasibility study and some of the technical reports that went into that study, as well as the revision of the alternatives that we developed, and then how that led to a preferred alternative. So we did many technical reports to inform this restoration. And so those included a hydrology and hydraulic study, water and sediment quality study, biology study, including a jurisdictional wetland delineation. We also considered cultural resources, as well as input from a geotechnical engineer, and we conducted surveys of the topography and bathymetry to understand better about the system. So the feasibility study, what that really does is it pulls together all of these technical reports, and it documents the process that we went through. So both going to these two public meetings that happened prior to the one we're currently in, as well as our work with our technical advisory committee, which involves agencies who will be doing the permitting, as well as experts in the field. It also includes our revised alternatives, and it compares and contrasts those alternatives to try to come to this preferred alternative. And so that included looking at costs, as well as quantifying the benefits, so that we were able to really compare those. So I'm going to go through just a couple of the studies. We talked a little bit at the last meeting about some of the studies we were doing, and I wanted to give an update on a couple of those and just highlight some of those things. All of this information will be available in the feasibility study, which we'll post online after this meeting. But one of the things that was discussed at the last meeting was a concern about erosion and how that was going to work in the system, especially with if we were looking at that channel meander and rerouting Loma Alta Creek. So many of you mentioned that the creek, when it is really under a storm event, it starts ripping through the system. And so there was that concern about erosion. And we wanted to really look at too, is it possible to remove some of that riprap to create a more connected marsh creek system? And so we did some hydraulic modeling, and what we found is that there probably is that ability to remove some of the riprap, in particular along the existing marsh in the western area, and potentially in the eastern area where we're looking at creating new marsh. And what these two areas have is room to be able to set back the slope a little bit more. And so if you can set back that slope, you actually reduce the shear stress, the velocities, and the potential for scour during a large storm event. Our modeling also showed us that, we want to probably keep riprap in place near the bridges to make sure that none of that really key infrastructure is going to be threatened. And additionally, on the south side of the creek, specifically near Paradise by the Sea RV Park, and then in front of the Buccaneer Park, there really isn't really a lot of room to set back that slope. And so we don't want to remove the riprap in that area. Another one of the studies that we looked at was relating the biology that we were seeing on the site with the hydrology, because the water levels here are so important. And it's such a dynamic system when you have the mouth of the lagoon closed sometimes, and then it opens during storm events. And so we did an eco-hydrology analysis where we related the elevations of existing marsh with the hydrology, so with the water levels that we see in the lagoon. And what's really interesting about this system is that it's very dynamic. So depending on the timing of storm events, that will drive whether the system has more fresh water in it or whether it has more salt water in it. And so we put together a conceptual model to inform the design to make sure that we're restoring something and we know what's going to come back or the dynamics of it. So this is the wetland mapping that was done, and you can see that on the west side we've got more of these green colors, which represent our coastal brackish marsh as well as our southern coastal salt marsh. And then on the east side it's more upland disturbed habitat. So this is a really great opportunity for restoration in this area. So I'm going to get into the alternatives and just quickly go through the three alternatives that we discussed last time, as well as some of the updates we made based on your feedback and feedback that we got from the agencies as well. So the first alternative was the Meandering Creek alternative. And so the idea with this was that we would actually reroute the creek to make it more of a meandering system, which looks more natural than a straight flood control system. And let's see, some other factors with this, we included a trail, but what we heard from you is that, doing a trail in phase one that isn't a loop trail wasn't very interesting, that you wanted to see the loop connect all the way around to the trail proposed for the Buccaneer lift station, as well as the coastal rail trail. And you wanted to see that right away in phase one. Similarly, we heard with the overlook that we were proposing near Coast Highway that there's already views from Coast Highway, so why not move it somewhere more into the site? We also heard that you wanted to get into the wetlands more. So the alternative that we put together to respond to those ideas included more of a meandering channel through the upland areas, a boardwalk that would cut through the wetlands to give people more access to those wetlands, moving the overlook more towards the coast and away from Coast Highway, and then making sure that trail connects during phase one. So this was the revised Meandering Creek alternative that was included in the feasibility study. Under phase two of this alternative, the city would look to acquire the parent family trust property, and this would be connected through a channel, but leaving this upland area surrounding it. The second alternative getting ahead of myself. So this is a graphic of what that first alternative could look like. So the second alternative we considered was a perpendicular channels alternative. So instead of having those creek meanders, we were looking at perpendicular tidal channel, channels that are similar to a tidal channel system. And again, looking at that overlook and the trail, and then this upland buffer to provide some distance between the wetland and development. Phase two of that looked like a more direct connection where we'd actually go back in and lower that upland area so that all of this would be restored to marsh. We'd have that trail on the outside that connects around. And we had included an optional potential to do some sort of work near Buccaneer Park if it made sense in the future. So nothing really to move forward with this but noting that that could be an option going forward. And this is what that option could look like. The third alternative that we looked at was a parallel channel option. And so including side channels, but instead of having them be perpendicular, have them be more like a riverine system where the side channels might be parallel to the main creek. And with alternative 3, we were looking at just doing one phase. So in the case that the parent family trust property couldn't be acquired, it could end up looking like this. And that could look like this. So I'll talk a little bit about the preferred design and kind of where we landed after revising those alternatives. So a couple of things here. We've got a slightly different color coding for the trails, so forgive us on that. But again, we heard really loud and clear that you want a trail that provides a loop trail from the get-go. So looking at creating more of this meandering system that would stay in the uplands. And so that was something that we discussing with the agencies, because Loma Alta Slough is such a small marsh system, there was reluctance from the agencies to allow having a boardwalk that would cut right through the middle of the marsh as we were proposing. So we did pull that trail back to the upland areas, but with some more natural meanders. And this layout is still to be determined. So, but this is approximately what it could look like. Additionally, we wanted to pull that overlook away from Coast Highway. So having that more into an area where you could potentially have views all the way out to the coast under the bridges and just get more into the marsh and away from Coast Highway. Another thing that came up since the last workshop is we were able to connect with the folks doing the design for the coastal rail trail. And one of the things we realized is that based on the location of their trail and elevations, we had to make some decisions of how we were going to do that connection. So the coastal rail trail will be at a much higher elevation than our trail is within the marsh. Similarly, the trail near the Los Lena treatment plant in the proposed Buccaneer lift station project will be elevated. So this area kind of slopes back up, and this is at a much higher elevation than our trail would be at. For their trail to be able to match up with the coastal rail trail, they actually have to increase in elevation to make it up to this trail. So one of the engineering decisions we had to make was how are we going to get our trail to connect up with this trail at the higher elevation and also maintain accessibility for everyone. So trying to follow the ADA regulations. And so we looked at trying to stay out of the marsh and coming back here, but the problem is that the trail that we would be connecting into would be at a higher elevation at the back of the site here. And so to do that and maintain ADA requirements, we would actually have to zigzag the trail back and forth to provide flat enough slopes for wheelchair access, for example. And so we did decide to come back over to this side at a slightly lower elevation so that we could make a more direct connection through the marsh and impact less of the marsh in this area. This is something that we've discussed with the agencies, and they understand what the constraints were with these other trails. And so this is a nice opportunity because it will provide the ability for folks to get out over the wetlands in a boardwalk situation and come across here. And I think that's it for this phase 1. The other thing I guess I should touch on is the channel meander. So we had been looking at this channel meander option, and one of the concerns was that it's going to cost more money to reroute an entire creek. And so while we believe that there are some benefits associated with a more natural looking system, we weren't able to have the quantification of those benefits really work out to provide to really justify the additional cost to do the meander. And so as a result, we decided to go with these more, the smaller side channels as a way to provide drainage and flushing for the marsh system. So then in phase 2, the trail that was around the parent family trust property would be deconstructed. We also remove that upland buffer area and move it to the back of the site and connect this wetland more fully through there. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Rima to talk through the environmental impacts and the CEQA process and how you can get involved.
Thanks, Lindsay. So in order to move forward with permits and get approval to restore Loma Alta Creek, the city has to comply with the state's Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA. So we've prepared a document that describes the impacts to the environment that will occur when Loma Alta Creek is restored. It's a document called a Mitigated Negative Declaration, or MND for short. The MND relies on technical reports for its findings regarding impacts to the environment. And it identifies mitigation measures that can be implemented both during construction and after restoration to try to limit and minimize those impacts. Next slide. These are the environmental topics that are discussed in the MND, and you'll see a discussion for all of these, and in some cases, mitigation measures that apply to all of these topics. On the next slide, we show that there is one aspect of the analysis where we look at the impacts to existing wetland habitats. We looked at the acreage of existing wetlands in Loma Alta and compared that to the size of the wetlands that would be created or enhanced to compare. And this screen shows in light blue the impacted wetlands and in purple the newly created. And overall, more wetlands will be created than impacted for this project, which is the intent of a restoration project. On the next slide, we show kind of the process of the MND. So once the MND is posted, and Justin will talk about where it gets posted and the timing, there will be a comment period for all of you to provide comments on the MND for 30 days. And then we'll prepare a response to all of those comments and issue a final MND, which the Planning Commission will then review and certify. We will be collecting comments and providing responses. The comments that come in that speak to whether there's a deficiency in the analysis, or if we're missing mitigation measures, or there should be adjustments, those are the comments that you'll see the most detailed responses to. And we really encourage all of you to review the MND. You are familiar with the Loma Alta Slough. We did our analysis based on the best available data, but we certainly would appreciate your input to strengthen the analysis and discussion of the MND. So I think we go back to Justin to talk about next steps.
Yep, thanks, Rima. So now as we move forward, following the release of this draft environmental document, the MND that Rima was describing for public comment, the project team is going to continue with progress on the additional restoration engineering. We're at a preliminary design level right now, and we'll be moving into what we call a 65% design through the end of the summer. So as part of the city's standard environmental review and also for compliance with state regulations, we will be initiating what's called a tribal consultation. It's a standard part of the CEQA process. We'll be consulting government to government with interested Native American tribes in the region. We also expect through our, from previous discussions with the wildlife agencies, that we can expect some more surveys to be done at some point in the future at the slough. The surveys are going to be required in addition to the biological surveys that were already completed at the site to ensure that we're documenting any occurrence or potential impacts to listed endangered or sensitive species within the project area. Typical species that fall into this category may be tidewater goby or light-footed clapper rail if they occur at the site. We are currently drafting the permit application packages to the different regulatory agencies that are going to be giving approvals for this project. And I'm going to go into that in a bit more detail on the next slide. And perhaps most importantly, we are fervently pursuing additional state and federal grant funding to complete the engineering design work that will basically be left to do at the end of this current state coastal conservancy grant. So under a partnership, the good news is under a partnership with the State Coastal Conservancy, we did apply for federal construction funds for phase 1 under what's called the National Coastal Wetlands Conservation Grant Program, which is a funding program for local for states rather, that is funded through the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, as well as a smaller grant that we applied for back in July for final design and permitting funds through the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. We expect to hear decisions on those funding opportunities by the end of the year. So we're keeping our fingers crossed that we get some good news, but we are keeping our eyes open on the horizon for 2021 and additional funding sources. Next slide, please. So here's a list of what we expect to be the applicable permits for the project that will be required to successfully implement the Loma Alta Slough Wetlands Enhancement. So as you can see, even with an environmental restoration project, our due diligence is still required to ensure that all local, state, and federal regulations are going to be met in performing the work. So we are also proposing as part of these permits a future zoning, general plan, and local coastal program amendment for the vacant city properties that fall on the eastern side of the area. This will dedicate them to open space since they're going to be effectively now becoming part of the habitat. Also, to comply with the Federal Clean Water Act, we are preparing what's called a 401 water quality certification, as well as a 404 dredge and fill permit with the Army Corps of Engineers. These are required anytime that you're doing work, even restoration work, within a water of the state or a water of the U.S. Also, approvals will be required from the California Coastal Commission, as well as the North County Transit District as well, due to the proximity of the railroad trestle that crosses over Loma Alta Slough. So some of these agency approvals will involve public hearings, notably an application for a consolidated coastal development permit with the Coastal Commission, as well as the proposed zoning map amendments to dedicate the included city properties as open space in the eastern project area. Next slide, please. So that wraps up our presentation. And before we enter our Q&A session, we'd like to let you know that a recorded version of this presentation, as well as the project's completed feasibility study, is going to be made available to you all and be posted on the city's website at the Watershed Protection Program homepage, and it's noted here at this link that you see on this slide. We do expect to have the MND documentation ready for release and public comment in fall of this year. We're currently working through that, and the public comment posting will be made available through various outlets. These outlets include emails to the public meeting attendees, both from this meeting as well as our list of contacts that we have from previous workshop attendees. So if you are comfortable sharing your email address this evening to be added to our contact list, you can do that in the Q&A box, or you can send an email directly to me. My email address is listed here on this slide for your convenience. And we will also have the MND notices mailed to parties that have requested such notice in writing before time. And the document will also be posted on the city's CEQA document webpage.